She was humiliated before she even sat down, singled out, questioned, and forced to move seats in front of a full cabin simply because of the color of her skin. No one stepped in. Not when the flight crew ignored her, not when they spoke to her like she didn't belong, not even when they made her child cry. They thought she was just another black woman in the wrong part of the plane. But what no one realized was that the very foundation they stood on, the system they relied on, the power they believed protected them, was already in her hands. Before the flight was over, their world would flip upside down, and the fallout, unstoppable. This isn't just a story about discrimination. It's about what happens when injustice meets the wrong woman on the wrong day. If you believe respect should never depend on race, hit like, subscribe for more, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. What would you have done if you saw someone treated like this? Let's talk. Monica Reed arrived at the airport 2 hours early like she always did, with every document neatly organized, her boarding passes printed and digital, and her daughter Lila clutching a small plush. Grace. She moved with practiced grace, wearing a soft brown coat, jeans, and a travel tote slung over one shoulder. Lila hummed to herself, skipping slightly as they approached the TSA checkpoint. Monica smiled down at her, savoring the brief quiet before travel chaos set in. But the moment they handed their IDs and tickets to the agent at the front of the line, something sickened. The agent's eyes scanned the boarding pass, then Monica's passport, then lingered on her face with a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't concern, it wasn't suspicion, it was judgment, disguised in silence. Without explanation, she was asked to stand to the side while other passengers behind them were waved through one after another, no questions asked. They were asked to wait as uniformed staff hovered by monitors, whispering without urgency, pretending to troubleshoot a system that didn't seem broken for anyone else. Monica held Lila's hand and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The line thinned. More agents arrived. No one looked at her directly. A man with noise-canceling headphones and a backpack full of tangled wires breezed past. A couple arguing over sunscreen slipped through without a glance, but Monica remained in place, her bag untouched, her daughter now fidgeting beside her. When someone finally approached again, it was only to ask for her ID a second time. Monica handed it over without comment. Her voice remained quiet, steady, and professional. At the gate, the same pattern repeated itself with surgical precision. Monica approached the boarding counter with her digital ticket ready. The agent looked up, hesitated, then asked her to wait once more. This time there was a flurry of typing, a second scan of her pass, and again. No explanation. When Lila asked if they were still getting on the plane, Monica just nodded. They were, the last allowed to board. No announcement had been made. No one else had been delayed. As they stepped onto the jet bridge, Monica adjusted the strap on her shoulder, her face impassive. Her silence didn't mean she hadn't noticed. Every extra second, every delay, every decision was etched in her memory like tallies in invincible ledger. Lina skipped ahead to the plane's entrance, eager and unaware, while Monica slowed slightly, taking in the glance exchange between two attendants as they noticed her approach. One of them straightened, cleared their throat, and stepped into position with exaggerated politeness. Monica handed over her ticket again. The attendant scanned it with a flick of the wrist, the beeping sound loud in the narrow space. No words of welcome, no eye contact. Just a subtle step back and a gesture toward the interior. She moved forward, walking slowly down the aisle as passengers already seated turned to look. Monica felt the weight of their eyes. It wasn't curiosity. It was the lingering discomfort of people who didn't want to question their own silence. She found her seat near the front of the cabin and sat down, helping Lila into the window seat. The tray tables were already lowered, water bottles neatly placed. The initial turbulence passed, quickly, and the cabin settled into the quiet, practiced choreography of routine. Flight. Seatbelts unbuckled, trays lowered, earbuds untangled, glasses of wine poured. Monica waited for the attendant to approach with the first round of service. As the cart slowly made its way down from her peripheral vision, she watched as rows ahead of her were served with warm towels, offered drink choices, and engaged with small polite conversation, all the gestures that signaled inclusion and comfort in a space built for ease. But when the cart reached her row, it paused, lingered, then rolled past. No eye contact, No acknowledgement. No mistake. She pressed the call button once, waited, and pressed it again after 3 minutes, when no one came. A small yellow light blinked above her head, unnoticed or ignored, until it eventually timed out. She didn't try a third time. Lila turned to her with a whisper that Monica barely caught beneath the roar of the engines. "Mommy, are we still allowed to eat?" Monica managed a soft nod, her voice low and reassuring, though the truth was, she didn't have an answer. A flight attendant passed by again, this time handing a drink menu to the passenger 1 row ahead. Monica's tray remained bare, her hands resting calmly, but her silence was now taut, like a bowstring pulled and held. She watched as her daughter reached for a small bottle of water tucked into the seat pocket, hands clumsy with excitement, fingers slipping. The bottle fell with a soft thud onto the aisle carpet, rolling just out of reach before coming to a stop at the feet of a passing flight attendant. It happened fast, without a moment's hesitation, as though Monica and Lila weren't even there. No effort to retrieve the bottle, no smile or apology, no acknowledgement that something had happened within view. For a second, neither Monica nor Lila moved. Then, from the opposite side of the aisle, a man in his late 40s leaned forward, reached under his seat and picked up the bottle. He passed it across the row with quiet dignity, eyes flicking once toward Monica's, filled not with pity, but with reluctant recognition. Monica took the bottle with a muted thank you and returned her gaze to the seat in front of her. Around her, the cabin remained unchanged, passengers flipping through magazines, watching in-flight entertainment, sipping drinks with steady hands and satisfied sighs. There was something more cutting about being excluded in plain sight than being openly attacked. The lack of confrontation did not lessen the harm, it refined it. It made it harder to name, harder to defend against. Shefford adjusted Lila's blanket again, checked the seatbelt, and returned to her stillness. She did not reach for the call button again. She did not look for the cart. Her comfort, she realized, would not be served here. At some point during the next hour, Lila fell asleep on her shoulder, soft breaths rising and falling in a steady rhythm that almost calmed Monica's nerves. But not quite, because Monica wasn't tired, she was focused. Lila was curled against her side in half sleep, breathing evenly, her small hand still clutching the sleeve of Monica's coat. The woman had trained herself over years to keep emotions in check, to carry disappointment in places where it wouldn't show, and that armor had not cracked, not yet. But the crack came quietly, with protocol dressed in politeness. A male crew member approached their row, clipboard in hand, eyes flicking between Monica and his notes. He leaned down slightly, smiled in that trained way, and said there had been a seat reassignment and he would need her to relocate. Monica blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly, but he repeated the request with just enough force to make it sound final. "Ma'am, this seat is now reserved for another guest." There was no apology, no mention of error, no explanation for why, out of all rows in this cabin, this seat suddenly needed to be vacated. Monica kept her voice low, asked if there had been a mistake, offered to show her boarding pass again, but the crew member avoided her eyes and only replied with, "Please follow me." The murmurs of nearby passengers began to rise, not from curiosity or concern, but from inconvenience. They didn't like disruptions, not in first class. Monica gathered her things without argument. She lifted Lila gently, whispering reassurance into her ear. "We're just moving seats, baby. Stay close." Lila's eyes fluttered open, convened. Monica followed the crew member down the aisle as heads turned and quickly turned away again, as if seeing injustice was too exhausting to bear at 30,000 feet. No one spoke up. No one asked questions. A man on her right shifted to let her pass, eyes glued to the screen in front of him. A woman on her left tapped out a message on her phone, her fingers moving faster after Monica walked by. They passed through the curtain that separated the cabins, the thin fabric meant to divide experience, value, worth, and into economy class. Monica knew this part of the plane well. She had sat here many times before, years ago, when comfort was a distant privilege. But that wasn't the life she lived now, not the life she had built. Still, when the flight attendant stopped near the last row of the aircraft and gestured toward a seat by the Dove, Monica said nothing. The air was heavier here, the ceiling lower, the hum louder. She set Lila into the new seat and took her place beside her. She didn't ask why this was happening. She didn't demand answers. Not because she lacked the right, but because she had already learned how the world handled difficult questions from women who looked like her. As the flight continued, she noticed the service cart didn't even make it this far. The bathroom door slammed more often. The lights above flickered once. But still she sat, still she watched, her mind stacking the moments like bricks. This was no accident, no system error. It was. An hour later, at an Operation Salad, Lila fell asleep again, this time less peacefully. Her small body curled into Monica's lap. She examined it again to be sure, quietly, not wanting to wake Lila, who had fallen asleep with her head resting heavily on Monica's shoulder. She pressed the call button once, waited, then pressed again after 4 minutes had passed without response. A flight attendant passed by briskly, clipboard in hand, eyes avoiding hers. Monica raised her voice just enough to be heard over the hum of the engines, and said that the seatbelt was broken, but the attendant gave a quick glance and said they'd get back to her. They didn't. Lila stirred in her sleep, her small hands curling tighter into Monica's coat. The temperature seemed to drop in the cabin, or maybe it was just the proximity to the galley door that let cold air leak through. Monica didn't complain. Instead, she took off her scarf and wrapped it gently around her daughter, tucking it behind her back, to keep it from slipping. She looked around. The passengers near them either slept or stood lit by. One man across the aisle, younger, alert, not asleep like the others, glanced in her direction. He had noticed her pressing the call button again. She could tell. He shifted in his seat, looked down at his phone, then looked back at her, eyes narrowing with concern. Monica tried to smile politely, tried to give the impression that everything was fine, but it was clear that even at a glance, nothing about this situation was ordinary. The man lifted his phone, angled it discreetly, and took a photo of the seatbelt buckle, the frayed strap hanging across Monica's lap, the blinking call light above them, and the child asleep beside her wrapped in too little warmth. He typed for several seconds, paused, reviewed, then tapped the screen decisively. Monica didn't see the post. She didn't know that in under an hour it would be shared by a popular travel influencer with over 600,000 followers. She didn't know that hashtags like flight shame and racism 30K would begin trending, or that a retired pilot would comment on the post minutes later saying that seatbelt malfunctions at that level should trigger an immediate cabin reassignment. Monica didn't see the growing list of retweets or the concerned replies from strangers around the world demanding accountability. She only saw her daughter asleep and cold, the metal armrest pressing into her ribs, the dimmed lights overhead flickering again as if mocking the idea of rest. As the flight continued, a second attendant finally approached her row, this one younger, less confident, and clearly uncomfortable. They said the maintenance log had been checked and there were no records of a faulty belt. Monica stayed silent. The attendant didn't offer a replacement, no alternative seat, no compensation, just a nod and the false promise of, "We'll let the ground crew know after we land." The man across the aisle looked up again, clearly hearing the exchange. Monica met his gaze briefly, her eyes tired but steady. She hadn't cried. She hadn't raised her voice. But the pressure behind her eyes felt like a wave pushing against glass, thin, stretched, silent, waiting. By the time the plane began its descent, Lila was still asleep, her body slumped awkwardly into Monica's lap. The seatbelt strap lay useless across her mother's legs, a symbol now of both failure and defiance. Monica straightened, smoothing her daughter's curls with her palm, eyes fixed on the seat back in front of her, unmoved by the turbulence. She didn't know that in the front cabin, one of the flight attendants was beginning to receive alerts on their smartwatch about a viral post with photos of their own aircraft. Passengers began to stir, overhead compartments clicked open, and seatbelts snapped loose in every direction. Monica did not move. Her seatbelt had never worked, and she had stopped pretending it mattered hours ago. She sat still, her posture composed, her daughter slowly waking beside her with a confused, sleepy murmur. She whispered softly to Lila, helping her sit upright and stretch, smoothing her daughter's hair while keeping one eye on the front of the cabin. At the front of the aircraft, something shifted. The lead attendant walked toward the intercom, but before they could speak, a group of 3 individuals boarded through the front door. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in black suits with silver ID badges clipped to their lapels. Their movements were swift but calm, not frantic like emergency responders, but purposeful like auditors who already knew what they would find. One of the men spoke quietly to the pilot, showing him something on a tablet, and within seconds, the entire flight crew was instructed to disembark the aircraft immediately. There were no raised voices, no accusations, only a firm, "You'll need to come with us." The lead attendant, who had ignored Monica's presence for the entire flight, looked stunned, glanced once toward the back, then walked off in silence. Monica didn't react. Her hands remained folded across her lap. She watched them leave one by one, the illusion of control stripped from their uniforms in real time. Passengers began to murmur, confusion thickening into speculation. The man across the aisle leaned closer to see what was happening, while others simply stood and waited, eager to grab bags and escape the awkward tension. No official announcement was made, but it didn't matter. Everyone knew. Something had shifted, even if they didn't understand it yet. Monica rose slowly from her seat, gathering Lila's things while keeping her voice low and steady. "We'll be off in a minute, sweetheart," she said, lifting her carry-on without effort. As they moved toward the front of the plane, a woman appeared in the entryway, older, poised with gray streaks in her tightly pinned hair and a long camel coat draped over one arm. She didn't speak. She didn't smile, but as Monica approached, the woman stepped aside and gave her a nod, not one of authority but of recognition. Monica met her gaze and nodded once in return. They stepped out of the plane into the boarding tunnel, where a second group of suited staff waited beside a portable terminal screen. Monica was directed to a side hallway, not with words, but with gestures and the quiet precision of people who had been waiting for her arrival. She was not asked for ID, she was simply acknowledged. Behind her, the sound of rolling luggage and shuffling feet resumed. The rest of the passengers moved forward, murmuring in curiosity, but no one stopped her. Lila clutched her hand tightly and Monica squeezed it back. The hallway opened into a private terminal lounge, cordoned off with glass partitions and a row of velvet-lined chairs. A man approached with a warm towel. Another offered juice for Lila. Monica declined both. Inside the report were screenshots, social media posts, time-stamped logs from the plane's internal system, and an annotated copy of the maintenance checklist that had ignored the broken seatbelt. Names were already highlighted. The photo taken during the flight had been viewed over 1 million times. It was already in the inboxes of national outlets and aviation watchdogs. The staff moved with subtle urgency, tablets in hand, whispering into earpieces, their polished demeanor cracking just slightly under the weight of what was unfolding. At the far end of the room, a screen lit up, first with the airline's logo, then with time-stamped footage pulled directly from the aircraft's internal surveillance. No sound played. There was no need. The images spoke for themselves. The first clip showed Monica pressing the call button multiple times as attendants passed without pause. Another captured the moment she was asked to leave her seat, confusion and restraint in her expression, while no explanation was given. In the next, a frame froze on the broken seatbelt and her daughter sleeping in her lap, blanket thin, light flickering overhead. Faces of crew members appeared one after another. Every movement, every decision, every neglectful pause was there, stripped of context, laid bare in high resolution. The room remained silent. Some staff averted their eyes, others stared straight ahead. Monica never looked away. She watched each clip with unflinching stillness, not to relive what she had endured, but to witness the shift she knew was coming. Aft. The final video faded to black. A new image appeared, an official document from Apex Link, the digital booking conglomerate that handled over 60% of all U.S. flight reservations. It was brief and direct. Effective immediately, all technology integrations and distribution agreements with Northwest Airlines have been terminated. This decision was non-negotiable and permanent. Logos disappeared from the screen, one by one. Apps, partner systems, affiliate brands, each vanishing like pillars collapsing beneath the weight of a decision long overdue. The silence inside the room held no confusion. This wasn't a negotiation. It was reckoning. Monica glanced down at Lila, who was drawing quietly on a napkin, oblivious to the scale of what was being set in motion around her. Outside the lounge, news outlets had begun to swarm. Camera crews formed quiet lines near the terminal entrance, microphones tucked beneath checked-its, waiting for clearance. Screens in other parts of the airport looped a breaking update. Major aviation tech firm ends billion-dollar partnership over discrimination claims. Industry analysts appeared via live feed to discuss the implications, but Monica didn't need commentary. She had already lived the conclusion. A senior executive entered the lounge with a soft knock, holding a sealed envelope and a list of names. Her voice was calm but faintly trembled. She said a formal statement would follow within the hour. Monica accepted the envelope and nodded. She didn't need to open it to know what was inside. As the executive left, Monica finally stood. She didn't adjust her coat, didn't check her phone, didn't look toward the glass where former crew members now paced in quiet panic. She simply took Lila's hand, handled the cum, and turned toward the private exit. Behind her, the screen went dark, replaced by a single line of text. "We stand for accountability." The world wouldn't change in a day, but the ground had shifted. What had started with silence had ended with visibility. Monica didn't walk faster. She didn't walk slower. She walked forward. Across the room stood a small cluster of corporate officials in tailored suits, their expressions tightly held behind carefully rehearsed neutrality. One of them, a public relations officer with visibly trembling fingers, slid a printed apology across the table. It was formal, meticulously worded, and included the phrase, "Deeply regret," 3 times. Cameras clicked behind the glass wall, news crews trying to capture glimpses through the frosted partition as flashes lit up like lightning in a distant storm. Monica looked down at the paper. She read every word, once, then again, then folded it slowly in half and set it down. She didn't speak. Her silence was louder than any signature. One executive shifted in discomfort and asked if she'd like to add a statement. Monica glanced briefly toward the press outside the room, then back at her daughter. Lila was drawing a small plane, flying above a mountain range in blue and red crayon, unaware that her mother had just refused to validate a system that had tried so hard to diminish her. Monica stood. The PR officer attempted to say something else, but her voice faltered. Monica adjusted the strap of her bag, took Lila's hand, and walked toward the side door. With quiet resolve, she did not wait for permission to leave. She didn't need it. As they exited the room, a burst of activity erupted outside the press barrier. Microphones rose, lenses focused, and reporters began shouting questions, none of which Monica answered. She didn't need to. Her silence had already become a headline. Meanwhile, inside the building, another stormed begun, one hidden from view. A leaked internal document from the airline's operations team surfaced on a secured industry server, then rapidly spread through journalist chain. It revealed that the airline's booking infrastructure, real-time pricing models, and seat allocation systems were built entirely on an exclusive license provided by a privately owned tech company. That company, according to the document, had been founded by Monica Reed 7 years ago. Her name appeared next to 3 patents. A photo showed her standing at a product launch, flanked by investors and engineers. The signature she refused to give them now, they had already printed in their contracts. The document reached the public 20 minutes later. Screens inside the terminal flashed with updates. Monica Reed identified as founder of Skyloom Systems, airline's core tech provider. Reactions were immediate. Industry insiders began dissecting the implications live. The value of Skyloom spiked overnight. Analysts speculated about its future without Northcrest. Some called her a visionary. Others called her ruthless. But none denied the facts. She was no longer just the passenger who had been wronged. She was the architect of the very platform the airline used to move millions. The woman they'd tried to displace had, in truth, built the ground beneath their feet. And now, with a few lines of code and a legal clause buried in a licensing agreement, she had taken it away. Mahala didn't stay to watch the headlines unfold. She walked with her daughter down a quiet exit corridor, her expression unreadable, her pace steady. Around them, airport staff moved out of the way with polite urgency, whispering into radios. No one asked her to stop. No one tried to slow her down. The weight of her presence had changed, not because of what she owned, but because of what she had endured, and how she had answered. Lila tugged at her hand and pointed to a small snack kiosk. There were side-by-side comparisons of the airline's scripted apology and Monica's silent refusal to endorse it. Industry figures weighed in, branding the incident everything from corporate negligence to cultural malpractice. But what captured the public more than any press conference or policy memo were the flood of testimonials that began appearing. A woman who had watched Monica be led to the back of the plane admitted in a lengthy post that she had wanted to say something but stayed quiet out of fear of confrontation. A man seated 2 rows away shared that he had heard a flight attendant mock Monica's passport photo before boarding, but convinced himself it wasn't his place to interfere. Dozens of these messages began circulating, not as self-exoneration, but as confessions. They did not ask for forgiveness. They acknowledged complicity. The tone had changed. What began as a viral scandal had evolved into a national conversation. Public figures and corporate leaders started citing the event in discussions about silent bias and systemic discrimination. Monica never responded directly to any of the messages. Her team issued no public statements. Her silence continued to do the work. The event was held 3 days after Monica's flight, in a sterile hall surrounded by logos now stained by public distrust. Cameras rolled as the CEO took the podium, once a man known for his confidence, now clearly rehearsed and weary. He didn't begin with spin or legal language. He started with an apology, not one crafted by consultants, but spoken with visible strain. We failed, not just in policy but in humanity. Then came a list of resignations, executives, department heads, even the regional manager who had authorized Monica's forced seat change. No questions were taken, with a single statement: full operational audit pending with third-party oversight and no return to business as usual. The public response was swift. Some called the airline's reckoning a long overdue collapse of arrogance. Others warned it was a distraction, a brand-saving maneuver. Still, what mattered more was the cultural aftershock. Travel agencies canceled partnerships, shareholders demanded ethical review committees, rival carriers issued policy clarifications to preempt suspicion. Passengers began asking questions they never had before. Would I have done if I had been on that flight? Became a common refrain. Monica's name was no longer just part of a scandal. It had become shorthand for quiet resistance, for composure in the face of calculated erasure, for the truth that even invisible battles can ignite real change. The head of customer relations resigned quietly at midnight, deleting their LinkedIn the next morning. Internal whistleblowers emerged with timelines of ignored reports and flagged incidents going back over 2 years. Screenshots of internal emails hidden their disembodied, their leaks linked and authenticated. The press pounced, lawyers followed. What had begun as a single incident now revealed the pattern beneath it, and investors realized the problem wasn't isolated, it was structural. Stock prices didn't just dip, they plunged. The airline lost 21% in a single trading day, the steepest drop in company history. Shareholders convened emergency sessions, legal teams scrambled to manage exposure, but the damage had already reached markets abroad. International partners withdrew their code-sharing agreements, credit agencies downgraded the airline's stability rating. A long-term alliance with a European travel group was terminated mid-cycle, citing reputational risk. Tech vendors pulled licensing, promotional contracts were dissolved. One by one, the pillars of the airline's financial architecture buckled, until only a shell remained of its once pristine image. The leadership team was forced to sell off secondary assets to cover pending litigation. A flagship terminal quadrant, staff furloughs began without warning. In the company's next quarterly earnings report, the numbers told a story that no executive could spin. Losses exceeded $900 million, 0 cents. The report cited rapid divestment, operational instability, and reputational crisis. But between the lines, everyone knew the true source. One choice made at 30,000 feet, magnified by arrogance, reinforced by silence, and finally exposed by a woman who never raised her voice. For weeks, analysts dissected how something so preventable had been allowed to metastasize. Internal audits showed multiple chances to intervene, moments when a crew member could have chosen differently, when a supervisor could have stepped in, when someone could have said, "This isn't right." But no one had. And now the silence they had once weaponized was devouring them from within. Former staff members began speaking out, not in defense, but in shame. One senior attendant released a public essay admitting that she had watched Monica be relocated and said nothing because it was easier to comply than to question. Another described the culture inside the airline as performance-driven but ethics-blind. The admissions were raw, not polished, revealing the rot beneath the company's glossy brand. Regulators opened inquiries. Transportation authorities began and now the people who had once looked down on Monica from their seats of power were watching their empire fracture from the foundation. Outside the industry, the public memory held fast. Consumers canceled flights, influencers boycotted, and advocacy groups launched campaigns demanding stronger protections against bias in corporate travel. The airline's name, once associated with luxury and precision, was now a case study in failure. Universities taught the incident in ethics courses. Business schools dissected it in leadership seminars. Months passed, and while the financial headlines faded into the background of newer scandals and shifting trends, what remained was something quieter but more enduring, an internal shift among those who had once stood on the other side. One of the flight attendants from that fateful journey, previously known for her precision and control, left her position shortly after the investigation concluded. She didn't take a job with another airline. Instead, she enrolled in a diversity and equity program at a local university. What started as an attempt to make sense of the shame she carried became a personal mission. She began teaching workshops on unconscious bias, drawing from her own failures, not theory. She didn't excuse herself in interviews. "I didn't see her as a person, I saw her as a disruption. That's the part that haunts me." Her voice was calm when she said it. Regret owned fully. Doesn't need drama. The workshops gained traction, especially within industries that had long operated on the illusion of neutrality. She brought in guests, including former flight crew, airport staff, and even passengers who had come forward in the aftermath. Slowly, the tone shifted. The story of that flight was no longer told only as a cautionary tale, but as a case study in the possibility of transformation. People listened not to be shocked, but to learn. In one particularly impactful session, she stood before a group of corporate trainees and said, "The systems we work in will always lean toward comfort, not justice. It's our job to lean the other way." Her words traveled farther than the room. Clips from her training sessions were shared in HR departments across the country, then in boardrooms, then at policy councils. The face once associated with silent complicity was now a voice for difficult truth. Eventually, Monica was invited to speak at a global tech summit, not about the scandal, but about leadership through restraint. She accepted, not for recognition, but for alignment. She believed in systems, not platforms. She believed in accountability without spectacle. On the final day of the summit, during a panel titled "Designing for Humanity," Monica stepped on stage alongside three others: a corporate ethics consultant, a behavioral psychologist, and, quietly, the former flight attendant who had ignored her call button. No introduction referenced the incident, no slide projected their shared past. But the symbolism wasn't lost on the audience. Each woman spoke not of blame, but of repair. When Monica's turn came, she simply said, "Technology reflects the people behind it, so do institutions. If we want different outcomes, we have to change the mirror, not just the interface." The room fell into stillness, not because of applause, but because of understanding. After the summit, Monica declined all interview requests. She returned to her company, now restructured under a mission-driven board. Skyloom shifted its business model to partner exclusively with organizations that passed equity audits. It wasn't a branding move, it was policy. Her team quietly worked to build tools that would flag pattern-based discrimination before it reached passengers. No press releases, no social campaigns, just structure, coded for justice. Meanwhile, the former flight attendant continued her training work, now part of a non-profit task force advising transportation regulators. She remained humble. She didn't center herself in the story. She told it only to remind others how easy it is to become part of the problem without ever raising your voice. Years later, in a quiet auditorium at a university campus, Monica and the former attendant crossed paths again, this time, not as opposites, but as participants on the same panel about systems change. Lila, now older, sat in the front row, notebook in her lap, listening intently. As the event ended, the two women stood near the exit and exchanged a long, quiet nod. There were no apologies needed. Not anymore. What had once been a story of harm had become a blueprint for change, and in a world still learning how to listen, their silence, this time, meant everything. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge injustice and reveal hidden strength. What part of Monica's journey impacted you the most? Was it her silence, her strategy, or the way the system unraveled around her? Tell us what you think in the comments, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Your voice matters.